Thanks everybody for joining us today. Just our quick standard disclaimer. This information is not legal advice. It's for educational purposes only. If you're already one of our clients and you have a question, it can be sent through our portal. And if you'd like to become a client, we'll have some information at the end on how to make that happen. So our topic today is generative AI in the workplace. And I'm going to start out by giving kind of an overview and some background, just so that people are familiar with how some of these systems work. And then after I've talked about some of that information, I'm going to pass it over to Andy so that he can get into some more of the information you need to know regarding the risks of using generative AI and then how we can assist you if you are using generative AI. So just as kind of an overview, artificial intelligence technology, it's been in the news a lot recently, but it's not really a new technology. It's been around for decades. Back in the 80s, there was something called Jabberwacky that was developed as a chatbot. And I think one of the bigger areas where people first became aware of AI was back in 1997. Some of you may remember there was an IBM computer called Deep Blue, and it was programmed to understand and play chess, and it actually beat a human chess champion. So that's kind of a big breakthrough on the AI front where people first got information on it. AI is not a single technology. There are many forms and applications of AI. There's something called narrow AI, which is designed to complete very specific actions. It doesn't independently learn, quote unquote. There's artificial general intelligence. That's an AI model designed to learn, think, and perform at levels like a human. And then there's also something called reactive machine AI. It's capable of responding to external stimuli in real time, but it does not build memory and does not use information for the future. So there's a lot of different types of AI that can be out there. Really, as people understand, it's a computer technology with the ability to simulate human intelligence, to analyze data, to reach conclusions about the data, to find some patterns, predict future behavior. Some AI models can learn and adapt with experience, but lately it's really been receiving more notoriety and scrutiny due to the use of generative AI tools, which we're discussing today. So think of things like ChatGPT, which we'll talk about in a little while as well. And people are using these technologies both at home and at work. So we're hearing some things that are pretty good about generative AI, and we're hearing things that maybe aren't so good, but we'll cover that. So what are some of the workplace uses of generative AI? Employers, they can make a decision to allow the safe, ethical, and secure use of AI for work tasks. And as I said, we'll talk about some of the things you want to watch out for, but what are some of the things that AI is being used for in the workplace, which is what we want to focus on today. So analyzing data is one of the big areas where AI is used. An AI tool can quickly sort, quantify, and analyze huge amounts of data. It can seek and report patterns. So that is a very useful tool for any employers that have large amounts of data that need to be looked through. AI is used to conduct research. An AI tool can perform searches based on specific queries and parameters. A lot of the workplace use of AI is for drafting. So think of emails, cover letters, memos, contracts, presentations, other types of routine documents. Generative AI can be trained to draft standard documents for use in the business and employment context. AI is also used to respond to basic customer service queries. Probably all of us now have run across that in one way or another, either using a text on our phone or maybe on a website of a business. Think of your internet provider, think of Amazon. A lot of those bigger businesses are using these chat bots to start the interaction with a consumer before they send you on to a real person, or even if they send you on to a real person. So those are some of the workplace uses of AI. Now, specifically today, we're discussing generative AI. So what is it? Well, basically, it's almost self-explanatory. It's a type of artificial intelligence that can make things, create things. Think of audio recordings of like human speech for use in things like advertisements, in podcasts and trainings. Generative AI is already being used for that application. Generative AI also can compose music, so that's another audio component that could be kicked out of a generative AI system. Writing code, generative AI might be used for computer programming, creating software, creating apps. Text usages, we're seeing articles and even books that are fully or partially written by generative AI. Advertisements are partially or fully written by AI these days. Simulations, a lot of employers are using generative AI to create simulations for specific types of training where we've seen things are maybe pilots, firefighters, maritime workers, people on ships, or power plant employees. Simulations are being created by generative AI to train those workers on different situations. 3D objects can be created by generative AI. So those are used in video productions, other things along those lines. And then actually videos themselves can be made by generative AI. What the tool would do is take existing video content, synthesize it into something new. And that's the risks that we hear about, which Andy will talk about in a little bit. But the deep fake is a term that's used where there are videos of real people saying or doing things that never occurred. Generative AI has just cobbled together a new video using existing sources. So that's something that people do have concerns about. With generative AI, let's talk about ChatGPT. That is a huge one that people have been hearing about for probably the last 6 months to a year. It's been in the news. There's been lots of articles. There's been lots of different ways that people have been discussing ChatGPT. It was created by OpenAI, which is a huge developer, and it's an example of a generative AI technology that uses a large language model, also known as an LLM, and a text interface to respond to users' queries. Again, that's the one that I think most people think of when they hear about a generative AI tool as ChatGPT. LLMs, just as kind of an FYI, are the dominant AI model right now. That's what most of the AI developers are using, because it allows back and forth discussion with a user. ChatGPT interacts with users in a conversational way by providing text responses to the user's natural language questions through an online chatbot interface. So basically a user enters a natural language query or question, and then ChatGPT produces a response. Now, the one thing to keep in mind just overall with generative AI is that it does not automatically understand human conversation. That's a very common misconception. AI has evolved into, people think that, oh, it's evolved into sentience, thinking and responding on its own. That's actually not accurate. Instead, ChatGPT and other generative AI LLMs work with probabilities. They just try to see what is the most probable response for our system to kick out based on the data that we're looking at. We'll talk about some of those concerns when we get to Andrew in a little bit, but that's just kind of a broad overview of ChatGPT. Another thing we're going to talk about here, I may not go through every single detail, but the reason why we're laying out some of these basic pieces in this generative AI presentation is that this gives you a flavor for how these systems work, what they are, and what to look for. We're sort of building with these steps here on things to be aware of as an employer. If you're going to be using generative AI in your business in any capacity, we just kind of want to fill in some of this background information. So we're going to talk briefly about the LLM. It's an AI system consisting of a neural network, which we'll also talk about. So that's a type of advanced form of machine language that has billions of parameters, can analyze massive volumes of unstructured data, and that results in the LLM, quote unquote, learning to create a sophisticated output. The accuracy of these LLMs is thought to be based on the extremely large volume of data analyzed, and that has only been possible in recent years because of cloud computing. The power of cloud server farms to be able to process data has greatly amplified the use of generative AI in any capacity, including employment. And also there's more and more digital information available online that these LLMs can draw from as they receive their queries, analyze them, and then spit out their responses. One of the big concerns, of course, is the accuracy of the output. There's always going to be some cautions that you need to look at, but we'll discuss that shortly. We're going to talk just briefly now about a neural network. We had mentioned that before. Again, it's an advanced form of machine learning that includes a collection of nodes. So these are little pieces like neurons in a human brain. They're little energy centers. They're linked to other nodes to mimic the structure of actual neurons. When a neural network is given an input, then the nodes connect, they create an output. That's just sort of the basic overview of how that works. And again, this is just kind of laying the foundation. We think it's important for our listeners to know what these systems are, how they work, and what the possible issues could be that come from them. Another thing to consider with neural networks, and this is kind of important, and we've all heard this before most likely with any type of computer programming or computer issue, is garbage in, garbage out. That also applies in the AI context. If you are putting in bad data, you are going to get a bad outcome using generative AI. The output in generative AI is only as good as the input. If you're a user of generative AI, you've got to understand how the tool has been set up, what data you're using, so that you keep that in mind as you analyze any output that might kick out. If you're not doing that, you're going to have a lot of risk on your business. And again, Andy will speak about that. But if you are, for example, in the hiring process using generative AI for screening and hiring applicants, be aware that a number of states have passed laws relating to those practices. And these are not just the employee-friendly states only, like California, New York, places like that. We're also talking about Alabama, Louisiana, North Dakota, Texas. I mean, other states that are more employer-friendly also have passed laws in this context. So it's an area to watch for sure. So we've laid the foundation, given you kind of a background on how generative AI works. Now we want to talk about some of the benefits of using generative AI tools in the workplace. So one of the big ones that we hear about, including from some of our clients that have mentioned things to us, is time and cost savings from organizational efficiencies. So employers could use generative AI to streamline certain organizational processes. We also see articles on how generative AI can do a better data analysis. It's able to spread a broader net and analyze things more in depth than maybe a single person could do within the same period of time. There can also be more accurate results that can be kicked out by generative AI. But again, going back to the last slide, that's presuming the data input is done correctly. Some of these results, if they're done correctly, could lessen the risk of human error when creating results. A generative AI tool can work 24/7. If you are in some sort of business that has a very complex data set that you use, this type of tool can be very efficient for you because it can be running in the background as needed any time of day for any length of time that you need. There can be faster results, which could produce faster decision making. That can make your organization be more nimble and help you move in a more streamlined manner through what you're doing. And also, use of generative AI could free up employees from sort of your more repetitive or mundane tasks so that they can focus on things of more substance. For example, generative AI is used to quote unquote crunch the numbers on huge amounts of data so that human workers could be available to do some different things. So those are the benefits of using AI tools. But now I'm going to toss over to our general counsel, Andy, who's going to talk about maybe some of the risks that go with it.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I find this topic endlessly fascinating. My news feed on my phone has been dominated by artificial intelligence talk the last, I don't know, year or so, I'd say. And so I've done some looking into it, both as a general interest, but also for use, as it affects the legal market, law firms, and advice that we give to clients. So I could probably talk about this for a good 2 hours. None of you want to hear that, so I will spare you my super geeky interest in this, but we are going to talk about, the downside. I wish I had some thunder, doom and gloom lightning sound effects here to kind of just underline that there are, while there are rosy utilitarian uses for artificial intelligence, there is business risk. And I'm not talking like dystopian future where Terminator comes and takes over. I'm talking about, real legitimate business risks to your business, to your bottom line, risks of lawsuits, and we're going to get into that. So take all of that stuff that Michael talked about, all the good things that you can do with artificial intelligence, and just realize, as you have all those in mind, and you're listening to what I say, you have to balance, the potential positives that Michael has laid out for us and the potential risks or downside that I'm going to lay out to you. And you have to do that balancing act individually in each company and for each program that you're going to use or look into using. So the first step is what data are you sharing? Are you using sensitive data? I ran across an instance a couple weeks ago where some employees at a company were putting earnings results in the ChatGPT. Now, if you don't know ChatGPT, if you use the public version, all that data is not protected. So if you put in your earnings data in the ChatGPT, anyone who has access to the database that ChatGPT uses to draw its information from can data mine that, and they can get information that is put in there by your employees unwittingly. Other things you can put in, people have probably put in HIPAA protected health information, and that causes issues. Are you now in violation of HIPAA? You have to report that. How do you even figure out that your employees did that? These are all risks in terms of data security that you have to be worried about. Or are your employees using it for something much more mundane? I use artificial intelligence every day. Microsoft Editor in Microsoft Word does grammar and spelling checks for me. There is not a lot of risk in terms of any of that information getting out. The fact that I can't spell separate, even though I know that it's not 2 E's but 2 A's, or not 3 E's, I guess. See, I still can't spell it. That's why I need Microsoft Editor and spell check. I'm not putting any sensitive data in there, so that's not something I'm really concerned about. Microsoft doesn't really share that information. That information is just checked against a large language model, a list of all the words in the English language and how to spell them. And that's, some of the risk that you have to analyze in terms of what tool you're using and what your expected return is in terms of doing that balancing test. Again, with sharing information, are you using a public data set or a private one? With ChatGPT, you could buy a license, and I'm sure with other AI models, you can buy a license, have that data be solely limited to your, the 4 walls of your corporation. It doesn't go beyond that. So those things can help prevent the inadvertent use or disclosure of confidential information by your employees that you don't want to do. Another fun thing is the risk of bias. Can AI be racist? As Michael said, garbage in, garbage out mostly, so AI isn't inherently racist. AI can only be as racist or as biased as the data set that's plugged into it. So I'll give you two examples. Amazon. Amazon used a resume screening tool to help identify potential high-performing hires early on in the interview process and screen out who actually got interviewed and who didn't. And what it did is it took its base of knowledge based upon programmers and software and IT people that currently worked at Amazon that were regarded as high performers and said, all right, what do all these people have in common? And it worked backwards, and it created a database and a set of rules that said, all right, based upon this data that you gave me, here are the rules, and this is what we're going to use to screen out applicants when they applied for jobs with us. Big problem with that is that Amazon's resume screening tool screened out applicants from all women's colleges. Now, all women's colleges are not like MIT or Stanford or whatever colleges and universities known for putting out a high volume of tech employees, right? Where all women's colleges, I guess my bias and probably Amazon screening tools bias is that their employees tend to go into less tech-heavy fields than employees or students from other universities. So what Amazon's resume screener did is it screened out an employee, potential employee, an applicant from an all-women's college who had all the skills and all the experience that was needed. It just said that she doesn't fit our model because the university that she went to doesn't match what we think we're looking for. Well, Amazon looked, and sure enough, it was discriminatory, and so they scrapped that tool. A similar situation was with Microsoft. Microsoft used facial recognition screening tools for video conference interviews. So if you're on a Zoom interview, they had a magical tool that would look at the applicant's face and infer emotion and other characteristics to that applicant. The screening tool that Microsoft used turned out to be discriminatory against Black people. It saw them as more hostile and other negative connotations than it did with non-Black applicants. As a result, Microsoft was hit with a discrimination claim and they scrapped that tool. So, the risk here in bias is that everyone here has good intentions, as far as I can tell. I'm fairly certain Microsoft wasn't intending to discriminate against Black applicants. I'm fairly certain that Amazon wasn't trying to discriminate against graduates of all women's colleges. It just happened to be that they had bad data informing their artificial intelligence decision. So that's a risk. The risk is that the underlying foundation of the AI that you're using is not it's not up to snuff or not fully baked, I guess would be another word. Some other downsides, environmental, social, corporate governance policies, ESG policies. There's talk about how AI might ruin the world, and by that we're not talking about HAL 9000, or the Terminator. We're talking about electrical usage and global warming. So AI is very electricity intensive. It's an electric hog, kind of like Bitcoin mining. It takes a lot of electricity for these computer models to run and these neural networks to, quote unquote, think and for them to do this stuff. So if you have an ESG policy at your organization, does this violate the E? Using all this AI, is it a negative environmental impact? Something to consider about. Other risks. Where are you operating? Are you in New York City? Are you in Colorado? Do you have laws that you have to comply with, like Europe's new AI law? Maybe it's not an AI law, but maybe it's a law like Illinois' biometric data privacy law. Microsoft's facial recognition software would be potentially in violation of Illinois' biometric data privacy law. Nowhere in that law's name do you get the idea that artificial intelligence is involved. So there's compliance risks that you need to take into account when you are using artificial intelligence. Talked about bias. Yeah, New York City, we talked about you have to do laws for automatic employment decision tools. You have to run sanity tests, for lack of a better word. You have to prove that they're not biased. And this is all pretty similar to what employers have to do with pre-employment testing. So if you hire an industrial psychologist or a company to perform pre-employment testing on applicants, you have to be able to prove that those tests and those screenings that you're doing are not discriminatory. Similar with Colorado's pretty much brand new law. Doesn't take effect until 2026, but it just passed, I believe, in May, that you have to take steps to ensure that if you are using artificial intelligence, that you're not going to engage in algorithmic discrimination. Be interesting to see what the EEOC does in terms of if they get a new class added to Title VII for algorithmic discrimination. That said, the EEOC has put out guidance in terms of how to use artificial intelligence in hiring. So that's not, it doesn't have the rule of law yet, but you can guarantee that the EEOC is going to be relying on some of that guidance when they look at discrimination cases, especially through the lens of artificial intelligence. Intellectual property violations are also a potential issue or risk with using AI. So if you ask AI to generate something, they could include information that's copyrighted by others in what it puts out. So I believe, for example, they were stealing, quote unquote, that's my bias showing up, co-opting news articles that were copywritten or books that were copywritten by other sources and spitting out its answers. And that is a violation of copyright law. And finally, for this slide, I know it's been a long slide, so thanks for staying with me. Breach of contract claims. There are a lot of publicly available software tools that might be used or might have requirements in open source licensing that you would be in violation of through your use of AI. So that's just something to keep an eye on. We're not going to dive deep into that because that's less of an employment law issue, more of a IT issue. But moving on, we're going to talk more about risks of using AI tools. The big thing here is errors and inaccuracies in work product. If you use AI to generate something and it's plumb wrong, everyone who looks at it and knows that you did it thinks, well, what an idiot who did this, who didn't even double check the work. Can also lead to legal liability. We talked about IP issues just earlier, a second ago, but also there's a case of an attorney in New York City who used an AI, I believe it's ChatGPT, to do some legal research. And the ChatGPT spit out some cases that didn't even exist. They're made up out of whole cloth. And that lawyer got in hot trouble. He got an ethics case, complaint filed against him. He was sanctioned, all for trying to use AI as a shortcut for his own legal research instead of using something like Westlaw. AI can also create and disseminate incorrect information or misinformation. Michael mentioned deep fakes. I think I saw a video of Luka Doncic after the Olympics that was strung together. That was a complete deep fake about losing basketball. So that's a risk. It's a real risk out there. of putting out incorrect information that can lead to, maybe a false advertising claim, maybe a consumer fraud claim, depending on how you're using it, how that information is getting out. And this last bullet point here, decline in workplace skills and standards. I had this discussion at the dinner table with my 7-year-old, seventh grader last night. We were talking about why you need to understand math and not just rely on Excel to do the math for you. The point here is that if your employees become too reliant on using AI tools, they lack the critical thinking skills, and the ability to discern whether or not the output is garbage or not. Junior employees are going to lose the ability to develop some basic workplace skills in writing clear and concise memos or other business communications. My wife, who's a CFO, said she can use Excel to do all the math she wants, but if she's generating a report and coding cells in terms of formulas, she needs to be able to understand the basics behind the math and the formulas underneath, so that when she sees the output in the cell on Excel, that she can tell, just doing a little bit of a sanity check, whether or not that's right or not, whether or not her model is completely flawed or not, based upon just understanding how it works and what the math should look like, instead of just relying blindly on Excel. Hallucination, it's a fun one. We're not talking about Tim Leary's in the 60s, tune in, turn on, drop out. We're talking about AI hallucination. So it's talking about providing incorrect or nonsensical answers with a high degree of confidence. Some might say a lot of lawyers do this in terms of blathering or advocating positions that they don't have proof of. This is a little different. So hallucination is that they provide incorrect or nonsensical answers. So we're going to give some examples on the next slide. But the point is that this is similar in terms of relying on Excel to provide you with all the math answers. You can't rely on artificial intelligence to provide you with all the answers and just blindly follow and erroneously rely on the tools, because the AI might not be right. Before we get to the next slide, I'm going to give you a perfect example. I was demoed AI legal product, man, it was September of last year, so almost a year ago. And I knew right at that point some new laws had come down in California. And I knew what the laws said because I'd done the research and I'd read up on them and I followed them. And so the person providing the demo for me said, hey, do you have any questions you want to try to test it out? And so I asked, some simple ones that I knew the answers to, like what is, how many hours do you have to work for overtime? What is the minimum wage in Wisconsin, et cetera, et cetera. And then I got to asking a question about the new California drug testing law that prohibits the use of non-psychoactive components to trigger a failed test. And I asked them about that law and when it was effective. And I completely missed the date by like 2 years. So I knew when I asked that question, I already knew the answer and I knew it was wrong. But the LLM model that was based off completely believed that the effective date was September of 2023. And I knew that was incorrect. I believe it's January 1 of 2005. But I'm not saying that with a high degree of false confidence. I would double check that before I gave anybody that advice. So moving on to this next slide, some more examples of hallucination. I love this one. Michael came up with it, it's great. William Shakespeare. So if you have a coworker who just happens to be named William Shakespeare, and you have a marketing employee who uses ChatGPT to help write a sales deck and wants to include some facts about their colleague, William Shakespeare, in it. So in response to your inputs to ChatGPT, it creates a presentation with true information about William Shakespeare, the playwright, English poet from 1500s. So while this information about William Shakespeare that you put in your presentation is absolutely correct when we're talking to William Shakespeare of the Globe Theatre in England, it is completely inaccurate when we're talking about our colleague William Shakespeare. So if your employee has little knowledge about either Shakespeare, which is probably an indictment on our educational system, it does not independently verify the presentation's data or ask somebody else to do it. Giving or distributing this presentation could result in embarrassment or worse for the marketing employee, the colleague who is featured in the presentation, and the organization. So there's your organizational risk in addition to the fear of public embarrassment and losing face personally. Google Gemini also can hallucinate. So Google Gemini, maybe a couple months ago, this summer, released their new Gemini image creating software for public use. The use of it, however, took a weird turn as users' prompts regarding historical events or people saw that the Google Gemini tool was producing historically inaccurate or impossible images. As a result, Google was forced to pull back and rework that imaging tool. Again, my favorite saying, garbage in, garbage out. That's what we got here. So what can employers do to save themselves from all these risks that are out there regarding AI usage and reap the potential benefits that are out there for legit AI use? So the first thing I recommend is an audit. Do an audit of your employees' use of generative AI tools. You need to figure out how much they use it, what they're using it for, and you need to make sure that your company has a policy. I think we'll get to that maybe if we have time. Policy regarding the use of generative AI within the workplace. What's allowed to be used, what isn't allowed to be used, what you can use company resources for. Make sure that all comports with your confidentiality rules with your company. So if your company has rule confidentiality, which they most, you have our employee handbook, there are rules on confidentiality and what data can and can't be shared. Make sure that you have that policy in place, and so your audit should dovetail nicely with what your existing AI policy says. In addition, your audit should be used to detect any other privacy issues or cybersecurity breaches. Make sure that your employees aren't using the tool by using private or confidential information, again, such as earnings, other information that maybe you have something from a client that you put in there. And make sure that your use isn't violating any of your IT policies, your cybersecurity rules. On top of all that, you get to check regulatory compliance. Make sure that AI's use is not against the rules for your business. Could it be in the hiring world, in terms of screening tools? If you're in New York City, I'm sure those laws are going to be expanded elsewhere. I haven't looked because California's legislative session isn't over for a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if I go after this presentation, look up what bills have been introduced in California this session and find something on it. Make sure that you are aware of what jurisdictions you're actually in and what jurisdictions require something or don't. Some states will cover, such as Colorado, for example, Colorado's salary disclosure law. If the job can be performed in whole or in part in Colorado, even though you're in Montana and you advertise on, I don't know, Monster or Indeed, if you publish that to Colorado for a remote job and that person can do the job in Colorado, you're going to be subject to that salary disclosure law in Colorado, even though you have, you don't have a footprint in Colorado. Same thing is going to happen with these AI laws, I predict. So make sure that you're staying at the top of what happens in terms of these new regulations as they come down. And finally, be aware of discovery obligations related to litigation. When you get litigation is commenced or even prior to it commencing, you'll get a document from opposing counsel or from the other side's attorney saying, hey, save all the documents related to X, Y, and Z. That includes emails, text messages, et cetera, et cetera. That's also now going to include any materials that were generated or put into AI. So make sure that your document retention policies will cover the non-destruction of those materials as well. This is just generally audit, good audit work right here. Make sure that you have a system to monitor and keep all AI outputs and inputs in place and document it. Work with your IT department and your AI vendor to make sure that's in place up front. And make sure you know all the source of all the data sets that you're using to get your outputs from generative AI. Keep records of your audits, your determinations, and your decisions, and any communications with these to employees and third parties. Track that information. Label all generative AI tool outputs to indicate that they are produced in whole or in part by AI technology. Finally, talk with your favorite attorney. Work with your AI vendor. Be aware of your terms of use with any of the software you use, and look for liability and liability shifting clauses. Those are always going to be hidden in the limitations of liability and indemnification clauses in your agreements with your software vendors. So those are all going to be important to look at to understand what your risks are and what your potential liabilities are. And if AI people are wrong, what they will do for you in terms of damages, if anything. All right, this is the last substantive slide today. Just a nice little overview. Make sure you have a policy. That policy should specifically address the use of AI. You should distribute the policy to all employees. That should either be in your employee handbook or in a separate standalone document. And consider providing training to your employees on the use of generative AI, the risks, and what safeguards they can take. In-house use of AI, make sure that it's for authorized purposes only. You can use it to draft emails, letters, memos, presentations, conduct research. But maybe you don't want to use it for or with company or employee confidential, trade secret, proprietary information into the AI chat box land. Maybe don't let them use offensive or discriminatory language that would be in violation of any other policy in your handbook. I think just like sexual harassment or anything else that goes, you have to make sure that all ties together and references each other. Don't allow the use of generative AI for creating output involving the use of professional judgment. That goes back to two examples. One, the lawyer who did legal research and found made-up cases, or two, somebody making a spreadsheet and just plugging in formulas from generative AI instead of going to the trouble of sanity checking, double checking that this makes sense. You can consider requiring advanced approval for use of AI. And also I would recommend that you track and document use of AI as you go along. Basic standpoint, review all generative AIs outputs before sending it out. Make sure, again, that double check is required, and that your employees actually have the skills to understand what they're looking for, right? So if you took a non-lawyer and they went into Chat GPT and they said, give me a case that says, X, Y, and Z, and Chat GPT just spit out an answer and they went with it, and nobody decided to go to Westlaw and key cite it or double check the history to make sure that that case is A, real, or B, hasn't been overturned. That's all important information that somebody should do. And put guardrails on what the AI can be used for. Maybe you don't want to use it for illegal activities. I think that goes without saying. Prohibit the use of AI to infringe on others' rights, either intellectual property rights or privacy rights. Maybe you don't want to use AI to interfere with the flow of work. Maybe you don't want AI to work on specific projects because they're sensitive and that data is under guard, under lock and key. Finally, always require users of generative AI to report non-compliant uses of AI tool, such as use of an unlicensed tool, use of an unapproved tool, use of a tool that's outside scope of work, and use of a tool that poses an identified unaddressed security risk, such as potential malicious code or material defects. All right. Here's where we fit in. We can help you with your AI questions. Ask us. We can advise on the proper use of generative AI. We can talk further about best practices and point you in the right direction. Ask HR clients generative AI as it relates to hiring and other employee-related tasks. That's going to be right in our wheelhouse. For those of you clients that have Ask Pro, that includes business stuff, we can definitely help you with the business use of generative AI and all the hurdles that go with that. Evaluate your risks with generative AI. Generative AI can be really great in some areas. I think I read an article, I don't know, Sunday, Saturday, about how they're using generative AI to create fusion reactors and design them, 40 times faster than a human can. That's potentially amazing stuff. But it can also be risky. You probably need to understand the engineering and stuff to make sure that the fusion reactor that mimics the reaction within stars is safe and is not going to lead to a runaway reaction and destroy life on Earth. Now that's an exaggeration, but there's also risks involved with the potential great reward. And finally, if you are using generative AI, we strongly recommend that you have an AI policy in place and advise your employees on correct and incorrect uses of generative AI. All right, with that, we're at the end today. I think right on schedule. Dan, do we have any questions that popped up?